What up? I'm B and welcome to my channel where we talk about all things true crime and current events. Today is another episode of Crafty Crimes where you and I sit down together, we talk about something related to the true crime world, and we do a little crocheting at the same time. I'm pretty excited for today's topic because it's been quite a while since I've covered a true crime case that is of the legendary status or has gotten to sort of a mythical place within our history. The past few weeks I've covered pretty deep cut cases that have been really heavy on my heart, and I think that those are really important to talk about, but I think it's also kind of fun sometimes to talk about these larger than life stories that we all know but we don't know the details of. So without further ado, we are going to be discussing the case of Lizzie Andrew Borden. She was born on July 19th, 1860 in Fall River, Massachusetts. Her parents were Andrew and Sarah Borden, but unfortunately, pretty quickly after Lizzie was born, her mom Sarah passed away, and then 3 years later, her father Andrew married another woman named Abigail Durfee Gray. The thing about Lizzie's dad is that he was super wealthy. Dude was loaded. He worked in manufacturing, bank management, and real estate development. So he had a ton of money. He was extremely successful, and he was just doing good. He was doing a great job at making money. Now, as far as siblings, Lizzie had one sister. Her name was Emma, and they were really close. Emma was older than Lizzie, but they still had a really great relationship with each other. And both Lizzie and Emma thought that Abigail, their stepmom, had only married their dad for the money. And because this was the 1800s, I can't say that that's abnormal, but to them, they didn't like it. They were like, she's only after our dad's money. That's the only reason she married him. She's trying to steal all of his money away from us and keep it for herself. And they disliked her so much that they would only refer to her as Mrs. Borden, which is like a subtle but really scathing roast at the same time. You know, they're not calling her anything mean, but they're very clearly saying that you're Mrs. Borden. You're not our stepmom. You're not someone we care about. It's very formal, you know? Because of how Lizzie and Emma felt about Mrs. Borden, Abigail, they were both super, involved in their dad's businesses. They were always fighting with him about money. They always wanted to know what he was doing, what new move he was making, how he was handling stuff, and they were just into his business about everything. They even managed some of the rental properties that he owned so they could have a say in what was going on in the business. And at one point, Andrew, their dad, had given several members of Abigail's family pieces of property, and the girls were so mad. They threw a fit about it. They were like, see, she's just here for the money. She's trying to get stuff for her family. She doesn't care about you, despite the fact that they had been married for years and years and years. They were like, this is the last straw. This is horrible. I can't believe you would give this to her. You've never given us any property. And basically just being brats. Being bratty, not trusting their dad to handle his own life and handle his own money. But anyway, so because they were just being total whiny babies about it, their dad gave them each a piece of property, so that way they could either live on it, manage it, make money on it, whatever. And instead of doing any of those things, they decided to sell the property back to their dad for a profit. So despite the contentious nature of their relationship with their dad and their stepmom, both Emma and Lizzie lived in their father's home well into adulthood. Which was pretty normal at the time. I mean, neither of them were married. At that time, they really had no reason to move out if they weren't married with a family of their own. It just wasn't a thing. So, it was rough. It wasn't the best relationship, but at the same time, it wasn't anything horrible. And so if you can't tell from some of the things we've talked about so far, Lizzie's kind of a brat. She grew up with a dad who was super rich, who didn't always love to spend his money, like spoiling his kids. You know, they still lived in just like a regular part of Fall River. There was this kind of bougie area up on a hill that everyone who had a ton of money, they were moving into. And Lizzie and Emma really wanted to live there. Like, they really wanted their dad to sell the house, move up there, so that way they could live the way they felt that they were entitled to live because their dad was rich. And he just didn't care about it. He didn't want to do it. And so, you know, they were really bratty, like money really mattered to them. Lizzie kind of had a history of shoplifting a little bit, like acting out, just stuff like that. But despite all of this, as an adult, she was just a pretty average, well-functioning member of society. She was really smart. She had really close friends. One of her best friends, Alice Russell, was her neighbor, and they got along great. And she even was a Sunday school teacher at their church, which was the Congregationalist Church in Fall River. Her whole family went, they attended, and she also taught Sunday school there. So from what we can see, despite some of the tension in the home, totally average person, like a well-to-do, contributing member of society. But things ended up taking a turn somehow. In the late summer of 1892, Lizzie would have been 32 at the time. She was still living at home. She went to a drugstore and tried to buy something called prussic acid. And this is more commonly known as cyanide, which is used as a poison. But back in the day, people used it in their everyday lives. It's kind of like how people used to use like chloroform to relax, or how like meth and cocaine used to be in everyday products, stuff like that. So this wasn't super odd that she went to try and buy it, but you needed a prescription for it, and she didn't have one. So the store clerk wouldn't give it to her, and she left. And that's the odd part of it. Not the fact that someone might need it, but the fact that, you know, it's known that you need a prescription for it, and she tried to get it anyway. But, like I said, she left the store empty-handed. So later that day, Lizzie went to her friend Alice Russell's house, and Alice was one of Lizzie's neighbors. They were like best friends. They were super close, and so Lizzie went to her and told her that she had decided to take a vacation. Apparently, Lizzie had been wanting to take a vacation, but she was going back and forth about whether or not she should go, if she should do it. She just, you know, wasn't sure. She wanted to think about it a little bit, but she thought about it and she decided, yes, I want to take this vacation. And the reason that she wanted to take it was because she had just been feeling really depressed. She kind of felt like something was hanging over her and she wasn't sure what it was, but she was worried for her own safety and the safety of her family's. Apparently, her dad had a lot of enemies due to some of the ways that he conducted his business. And we don't really know what that is, if he was into some shady business dealings or if he was maybe an upright business owner and turned some people away who would have been mad about that. But in any case, Lizzie's concerned about the safety of herself and her family for several different reasons that she gets into, all within the course of one conversation. After telling Alice that she's decided to take this vacation, she starts telling her that she's really concerned someone is trying to poison her father. You know, she's been concerned about the safety of herself and her family, and now she thinks that these concerns are valid because someone tried to poison them. And the reason that she thought that someone was actually trying to attempt to poison them was because everyone in their family had gotten sick. Herself, her sister Emma, her dad, her stepmom, they had all eaten this bread and gotten sick. And the reason that they thought it was the bread was because they'd all eaten it, and then the following days they were throwing up, they were super ill, and one of their servants, Maggie, her real name is Bridget Sullivan, but they called her Maggie for some reason, she had not eaten any of the bread and she didn't get sick. So they were like, it's gotta be this. And so Alice hears this and she's like, I don't know, I mean, it would be kind of hard to tamper with the bread. Like, the person trying to poison you would have to be the baker. Was it him? Like, does he have a problem with your dad? And after kind of pointing out how unrealistic this theory was, Lizzie was like, okay, well, maybe it was the milk. We all drank this milk. We all got sick. Maggie didn't have any of it, and Maggie's fine. So it's got to be the milk. And the reason that she thought somebody could have tampered with the milk was, at that time, they would have these jars of milk, and whenever the milk was empty, whenever the jar was empty, Maggie would wash out the jar, place it outside, and then a farmer would come by and fill it up the next day. And so Alice obviously knows this because that's how her family gets their milk as well. And she's like, well, the farmer comes when it's already light out. So unless the farmer's the one messing with your milk, someone's going to have to come by after that, add something into the jar, and get away without being seen in broad daylight. I don't think that that's what's happening. So Alice is basically shutting her down on both of these things. She's like, I don't think you're in danger. I think you're fine. Like, you really don't need to worry about this. But Lizzie won't let it go. This is within the same conversation. She reminds Alice that someone is after her dad. Someone is trying to get to him. Her dad has this enemy. He has so much trouble with these men that come to see him, whatever that means. And apparently her dad had had this altercation with another man a few days before. He was trying to rent one of her dad's properties for something, and her dad said, I don't care to let my property for such business. And the man said, I shouldn't think you would care what you let your property for. And Lizzie didn't know what the man wanted to rent the property for, like what the purpose was, but apparently that's what she heard, and her dad got super mad that the dude said that and kicked him out of the house. And then she said later that night, she saw the same dude kind of like skulking around their property, scurrying around and just being suspicious. And apparently Alice still wasn't really convinced that this was a real concern that Lizzie should be taking to heart, so she moves on. She tells Alice, our barn's been broken into twice. Here's the thing. Their barn had been broken into. But Lizzie was keeping these pigeons in the barn. She was like raising pigeons. And all the neighbors were pissed. They were like, why do you have these pigeons? They're causing problems. More pigeons keep coming in because you're holding pigeons in the barn. There's bird poop everywhere. We want to get rid of these pigeons. And so that's why people had broken into the barn, was to get rid of them. And Alice obviously knew this. She and Lizzie were really close. And she told her, she was like, the only reason people are breaking into the barn is to get those pigeons. So Lizzie was like, no, you don't get it. It goes even further than that. Someone broke into the house while just Emma and Maggie were home. And Alice is like, so what do you mean somebody broke in? You didn't tell me that. She said she'd never heard of that happening. Lizzie had never ever told her that someone actually broke into the house. And Lizzie's explanation was, well, my dad said not to tell anybody. He didn't want to make a big deal about it. He didn't want our business getting all out there. But yeah, somebody broke in. They stole stuff from Abigail's room. So they stole a watch, a chain, money, and car tickets, all from her stepmom's room. And apparently they left a nail in the keyhole that they used to break in. And so her dad didn't want anybody to know. They wanted to keep it quiet, handle it privately, and apparently they had told like a contact on the police force about it and said, if anyone tries to use those car tickets, then we'll know. We'll know who it was. But, we don't need to make a whole big stink about it. And so by this point, Alice seems like she's kind of accepting what Lizzie's telling her, kind of realizing, all right, my friend's concerned. She's going through a tough time. She doesn't say anything that really lets Lizzie know that she believes her, but it seems like Lizzie has gotten to the point where she thinks that she's convinced Alice enough that this stuff is happening, and she's really concerned about it. So she finishes her conversation by telling Alice, quote, I feel as if I wanted to sleep with my eyes half open. With one eye open half the time for fear they will burn the house down over us. And while the house fire didn't destroy the Borden home, something else did. The next day, a horrible tragedy occurred. The morning of August 4th, 1892, started out pretty much just like any other day. Maggie made breakfast for Mr. and Mrs. Borden, and they ate together. They also had a house guest named John Morse who was with them, and he ate breakfast with them as well. John Morse was Sarah, Mr. Borden's first wife. That was her brother. And yes, Sarah passed away, but John remained pretty close with the family, and so it wasn't abnormal for him to come visit, stay for a few days, and just kind of hang out and have some time with the family. So the three of them are eating together, and then by the time they're done, Lizzie decides to come down. Lizzie liked to sleep in, and she also didn't like to eat breakfast with her family, so this wasn't abnormal. She would usually kind of wait, and then by the time they were done, then she would come down for her breakfast. So Maggie, sees Lizzie's down, she's ready for breakfast, she starts to make her food, and then for some reason, Maggie gets really sick. And so she's outside, she's throwing up, she's there for like 15 minutes. So this kind of helps us debunk the theory that somebody was actually trying to poison her family. Yes, everybody got sick, but Maggie didn't eat any of the bread. Maggie didn't drink any of the milk. She got sick a few days after all of them. So it's probably like a flu that traveled through the fam. She comes back in. Lizzie's pretty much done with her breakfast. She leaves, goes upstairs, and Abigail, Lizzie's stepmom, asks Maggie to clean the inside and outside of all of the windows. And this is a task that is going to take several hours and require a lot of effort on Maggie's part. So Maggie gets to work. She's obviously moving all around the house. She doesn't just stay in one place. She's going inside, outside, refilling the water pail, walking around. Like, throughout the course of the morning, she is everywhere in the house. And she doesn't notice anything suspicious. Nobody comes to the door. Nobody's looking around the property. Like, nothing out of the ordinary happens whatsoever. So at one point, Lizzie comes to Maggie and says, hey, I'm going to be out and about. I'm going to be doing some stuff outside. If you want to lock all the doors to the house, that's totally fine. I'm going to need some water at some point. She doesn't say for what, but I can always just get it from the barn. So feel free to lock them. I'm going to be out doing my own thing. So Maggie's like, okay, I hear you on it, but I'm going in and out doing all this washing, so I'm just going to leave them unlocked. And at this point, Maggie believed that she, Lizzie, and Abigail were the only ones home. Emma, Lizzie's sister, had gone to visit a friend. John Morse had gone to visit one of his friends because he was in town on a trip, wanted to see some of the other people that he knew. And Andrew Borden had gone to run some errands in downtown Fall River. Eventually, Maggie hears some rattling at the door. And she's not sure who it is or what's happening because she left the doors unlocked. So she goes to see who it is, and it's Andrew Borden. It's Lizzie's dad. He's been locked out. There's 3 locks on this screen door, and they're all locked. He's locked out. And so she's unlocking all of these, and she sees Lizzie at the top of the stairs. So she says to her, Pasha. That's from her testimony in court. She looked at her and said, Pasha. Presumably because, I don't know, maybe she thought Lizzie was playing a prank on her dad by locking him out, or she was just annoyed at having to unlock all these locks. I don't know. But she says Pasha to Lizzie at the top of the stairs. Lizzie starts laughing, watches her unlock all of these locks, and let her dad in. And then once her dad's inside, Lizzie comes down and starts talking to him about his trip downtown, asking how it was, just kind of making conversation. And she lets her dad know that Abigail had received a note from a friend who was really sick, and so she decided to go out and visit her. Lizzie didn't know the name of the friend, she didn't see the note, but that's what she knew of the situation, so she was just telling her dad, that's where your wife is. After this conversation, Andrew goes upstairs to take a rest. He spent all day running errands, he's going to lay down for a little bit. Maggie finishes washing these windows pretty quickly after Mr. Borden goes upstairs. And so she finishes, she's been working all morning cleaning these windows, and she decides to go take a little bit of a rest, relax, she's finally done. She can chill for a little bit. So she goes upstairs, she lays down on her bed, and her room is on the 3rd floor. So she's at the very top, and then Mr. Borden's room is right underneath her. So she goes all the way up. She hears the city hall bell ring, which indicates that it's 11 a.m. And she's laying down for about 15 minutes when all of a sudden she hears Lizzie screaming. Maggie, come down quick. Father's dead. Somebody came in and killed him. So Maggie pops up real quick, starts going downstairs, and sees that Lizzie is right outside her dad's door. So she's trying to go in, and Lizzie's like, no, don't go in. Go get a doctor. And Maggie's confused as to why they would need a doctor for this, because if he is dead, we would call the police. So Maggie's confused. She's like, what happened? Where were you? Did you hear anything? Did you see anything? What is going on? Lizzie said that she was out in the backyard and she heard a grown man in the house She didn't say if he was like yelling at her dad, if there was a fight going on, whatever. But she hears a grown man in the house, and when she came from the backyard to the house, the screen door was open, and she went upstairs, and that's when she saw her dad. And Maggie's already kind of like, what's happening? What's going on? You know, I didn't hear anything, so I didn't hear a man. You know, she was directly above Mr. Borden's room. If there was a dude in there yelling at Mr. Borden or some kind of fight happening, she probably would have heard it. And she knows that because she had decided to go upstairs, she locked the screen door. She had hooked it shut. You know, she knew that Mr. Borden was resting. No one else was home. Lizzie was going out and about, but Lizzie had told her, you can lock the door. And so because she was going to lay upstairs, she locked it. But Lizzie's saying that when she came to the house, it was open, you know, which tracks with somebody coming in and attacking her dad. But again, Maggie did not hear anything. So despite all this, Lizzie's continuing to ask Maggie to go get a doctor, and then she also asked her to go get her friend Alice Russell, the one that she'd been talking to the night before, because she didn't want to be alone. So Maggie comes back, she's got Alice with her, there's a doctor at the house finally, and several of the neighbors have kind of noticed a commotion going on, and so they're inside the house at this point too. And Maggie starts talking about how she really wishes that she could find that note about Abigail's sick friend, so that way they could know where Abigail was. They could go get her and just let her know, hey, something's happened. Mr. Borden's sick. Like, you need to come home. And when Maggie starts saying this, Lizzie replies, Maggie, I'm almost positive I heard her coming in. Won't you go upstairs to see? And Maggie straight up says, I'm not going upstairs alone. Smart girl, because somebody just got murdered upstairs. But eventually, one of the neighbors, her name's Adelaide Churchill, you know, she was there checking out everything, being kind of nosy, but, you know, we'll let it slide. So she agrees to go upstairs with Maggie. The two of them are looking for Abigail, and eventually they find her in John's room, and she is dead. Face down on the floor, blood everywhere. So, both Lizzie's dad and stepmom have been murdered. They get a medical examiner over there, they do the investigation, all of that, and they determine that Abigail Borden had been struck 19 times with a hatchet, and Andrew had been struck 11 times with the same weapon, presumably. And this whole time, Lizzie is saying that somebody broke into the house, somebody killed her dad, and then they waited a little bit and they killed Abigail. You know, this was a stranger, somebody broke in, somebody did this because, you know, her dad was home, killed the dad, and then at some point she heard Abigail come home and murdered her as well. And this might seem like just kind of the most wild theory that you could think of, because wouldn't Abigail have been like, why is everybody here? Like, it seems odd to think that she would come into her house and not notice that there's a ton of extra people there freaking out about a murder. But there was like a back entrance to Abigail's room, and so she wouldn't have had to come in through the front door. She could have gone around and possibly not seen anybody. But at the same time, how realistic is that? So people are really questioning this theory because they're like, there's no way. Even if she went up the back stairs, she would have heard something. You know, walls are thin back then. You could have heard somebody downstairs. Like, she would have heard the commotion going on in this house. So people already don't believe that that's what happened. And then to kind of further drive this point home, they find out that Abigail was killed before Andrew. And the reason that they know this is because the blood that was around Abigail's body had become really, really dark and it was congealed. So it had been sitting there for a really long time. Plus, Abigail's body was completely cold. And Andrew's body was definitely not. And an additional piece of information that supports this theory is the fact that they found her in John Morse's room, or the guest bedroom. And the only reason that Abigail would have been in John's room or the guest room is because she was changing the sheets. Yeah, they had Maggie and they had several other servants who kind of took care of the house, but everyone was responsible for their own bedrooms. So like changing sheets, making sure it's clean, all that stuff, that was the responsibility of each member of the family. So Abigail would have been in there in the morning. Like she would have taken care of it right after breakfast. She wouldn't have waited. So that's why she was in John's room. So obviously the police have one idea of the timeline of things and how it's all lining up, but Lizzie is still very vocal about her own opinion, her timeline of things, and what she thinks happened. Somebody broke in, they murdered her dad, and then they murdered her stepmom. And even if it was somebody who broke in and committed these murders, they would have had to have murdered Abigail first, and then hidden the house for several hours, and then killed Andrew. Which just doesn't track. Especially when you consider the fact that Maggie was going all around the house cleaning these windows. You know, they would have had to have a very good hiding spot. So the police are pretty suspicious of Lizzie right off the bat. And something that adds to their suspicion is that, yeah, she yelled when she found her dad's dead body, but after that, she was just chill. So the police are like, yeah, that's suspicious. And they ended up arresting Lizzie a week after the murders took place. Now, of course, the police looked into other possibilities. They didn't just try and pin it on Lizzie right away, but considering the timeline of everything that happened and the fact that Lizzie was the only one who heard that Abigail was going to go see a friend and no one could find the note, nothing like that, you know, just looking at the timeline and everything that happened, it really only made sense that Lizzie was the one who had done this horrible crime. And timeline aside, Lizzie's friend Alice had told the police that the day after the murders, she'd caught Lizzie burning one of her dresses in a fire. And when she asked Lizzie why she was burning one of her favorite dresses, she said that it had gotten paint on it. And so she, couldn't wear it anymore. It was ruined, and so that's why she was burning it. So the police think that Lizzie was either wearing this dress when she committed the murders or that she had committed the murders without any clothes on and then used that dress to wipe herself off, because this type of crime, a hatchet to the face, would have been extremely bloody, and they didn't see a blood trail. No one had blood on their clothes. Like, nobody looked like they had committed the murder. So they're pretty sure that Lizzie had wiped herself off, or, she changed out of a dress real quick and now she was getting rid of the evidence. So with all of this evidence in their pockets, Lizzie was indicted on December 6th, 1892, and 6 months later, her court case began. Now, Lizzie was obviously wealthy because of her father, and she had an incredible legal team. They got a ton of stuff stricken from the record, or they got it to be deemed inadmissible in court. And one of the biggest things that they got taken out that was not allowed to be presented in court was the fact that Lizzie had tried to buy that poison the day before her family was murdered. And apparently they decided, yep, that's irrelevant to the case because her parents were bludgeoned with an axe or a hatchet, not poisoned. So it's inadmissible, it's prejudicial, it's irrelevant to the case. Additionally, Lizzie had claimed that she was in the barn when the murders took place, but when the police went and looked at the barn, there was this big layer of dust in the area that Lizzie had said she was during the time of the murder, and there were no footprints, no footsteps, nothing had been disturbed. It was very clear no one was in that area of the barn, but that couldn't be part of the case because for some reason, Lizzie's legal team was able to argue that that should not be discussed in court. So the prosecutors are kind of just grasping at straws here. They're trying to use anything at their disposal to get this conviction. And they had an idea that they thought was going to be a surefire success. They knew that Lizzie had not reacted too extremely to finding out her dad and stepmom were dead. Like I said, she screamed when she found her dad's body, but after that, she was fine. So they thought that if they brought in Lizzie's parents' skulls and presented them to her in court, it would convince the jury that she was a callous, cold-blooded killer and we need to lock her up right away. So they bring these skulls into the courtroom. and they cover them up with part of the dress that Lizzie had not managed to burn. I don't know if it was to like build suspense or to be theatrical or what, but they have it covered by that dress, and then they reveal the skulls, and Lizzie faints and appears to remain unconscious for several minutes, effectively gaining a ton of sympathy from all of the jurors. And then on June 30th, 1893, the all-male jury decided that Lizzie was absolutely incapable of committing any sort of crime of this nature, and they found her not guilty. Which was kind of the shock of the century, because the journalists in that town, because this was national news, like, this was a woman who was accused of killing her father and her stepmom, like members of her family. She was in newspapers all over the country. Like, journalists went wild with this, and they published a ton of stories about her. Like, this was the talk of not just the town, but the country. And so everybody was shocked that the jurors found her not guilty because of what they'd seen in the press. But obviously, you know, in our system, you're not supposed to be swayed by the press, so you're not supposed to see any like newspapers or media of any sort. You know, you're sheltered from kind of the exaggeration that was going on at the time. But after being found not guilty, Lizzie obviously inherited a good portion of her father's estate, and she and her sister Emma decided to move to the bougie part of town that they'd been wanting to live in for so long. It's really interesting that they decided to stay in Fall River because literally everyone in town thought Lizzie was guilty. They hated her. Like, they were so mad that she stayed in their town. But she did, and and despite staying in a town where everyone knew her, she decided to start going by Lisbeth instead. I really don't know how that helps hide your identity when you grew up in this town with everyone else there and they all know you, but that's what she did. And despite, being accused of killing her parents, Lizzie and her sister Emma, they bought the house together. They remained extremely close for many years after this, and it seemed like Emma never doubted Lizzie for a second. She didn't think that Lizzie committed this crime. She supported her sister completely, and like I said, they were extremely close for years and years and years. And the interesting thing is that being accused of killing their dad and stepmom didn't break up their relationship, but the thing that was able to push Emma over the edge was Lizzie's relationship with a woman named Nance O'Neill. In 1904, Lizzie and Nance, she was an actress, they met and they became super, super close, and for some reason this was not okay with Emma. And 2 years after their friendship began, Emma moved out and never talked to Lizzie again. But some people theorize that Emma somehow found out, whether it be through a confession on Lizzie's part or, I don't know, something hidden, some piece of evidence came to light, but that Lizzie did kill Andrew and Abigail. And so, despite supporting her for so long, she just was like, okay, now I found out that you did this, and that was where she drew the line. She had to cut her out of her life forever after that. But in any case, after Emma moved out, Lizzie lived a pretty normal life, nothing too newsworthy after the murder trial. And on June 1st, 1927, at the age of 67, Lizzie passed away of pneumonia. And unfortunately, just a few days after that, Lizzie's sister Emma passed away as well. And it seems like, if maybe Emma knew that Lizzie had actually done it and still decided to stay by her sister, and the only reason they split ways was because she thought that Lizzie was having a risque relationship with this actress. If she knew for all these years that Lizzie had actually done it and she was fine with it and she loved her sister, it's like, well, she died before she could tell anybody what actually happened. But Maggie was like 6 years younger than Lizzie, and so she and several other servants within the house would have had ample time to come out and say something. They were often accused of protecting Lizzie, and some of them even admitted, that they took extra steps to make sure that nothing bad happened to her. So, one of them could have definitely spoken out, but nobody ever said anything. So it's unclear if Lizzie did it and was just real sneaky, or if someone else actually did it and they just went free. Technically, we will never know, but in the mind of the American public, she's guilty. We all think of this story, and it's not even about the murder of Abigail and Andrew, it's about Lizzie Borden. Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. You know, like it's all about her. It's all about the mythical nature of the story, and I don't think even if somebody else committed the crime, I don't think we would care. We would always think about Lizzie Borden and the terrifying idea that a seemingly normal person could just one day snap and kill the people who raised her. So now that you've heard the full story, what do you think? Did she do it, or was she framed? Was it Maggie who committed the murders? Was it one of her father's enemies in the business world? Who knows? Let me know what you think. And while you're doing that, if you would consider liking this video or subscribing to my channel, that would be incredible. And if you have subscribed already, thank you so much. I love being able to just sit here, hang out, and talk about whatever. And I really loved being able to research a story like this for this week. Like I said, I am incredibly passionate about current cases and the things that we can learn from them, but they do tend to weigh pretty heavy on the heart. So it was really, I don't want to say nice, but kind of nice to do a story that is kind of mythical and legendary and reached that status in our history and in our mind where, you know, it's the stuff of legends. It's not as emotionally connected as stories that have happened more recently. So as weird as this is to say, it was a lot of fun to research this case, and it was just incredibly interesting because there's so much stuff that I didn't know about it. But with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and let you go. Thank you so much for watching. Please be kind to people, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.